7 o'clock. When do we start?
Yeah. Well, that clock is not necessarily accurate.
Then what good is it? That clock isn't even right twice a day. A broken clock would be.
Oh, right. I see what you're saying.
It's consistently wrong all the time. Sort of like Trump. But even Trump, according to Rick Perry,
Welcome to Oh Say Can You See? I'm Mark Zapotowski. I'm here with Stephen Durst. Tonight we're going to be talking about all things Trump's dominoes are falling. Trump seems to actually be on his way out at this point. There's a situation where so many people are actually obeying subpoenas now. There are additional whistleblowers coming forward. There's testimony in private, and so people are eager to obey subpoenas so that they can at least minimize the damage to themselves as much as possible by telling the truth, at least the people willing to come in. We're not talking about Giuliani, he's a holdout, but we have Volker, who's willing to come in. We have Kent, the Assistant Secretary of State under Pompeo, who resigned recently, who has come in and testified. Fiona Hill, National Security Advisor for Russian Affairs, who resigned last year, has testified. And for 9 hours, the former ambassador, who was forced out by the Trump administration and by machinations of people in and connected to the Trump administration, legitimately or illegitimately, were illegitimately seeking to force her out last year and succeeded. She testified for 9 hours. Based on that, these people are essentially rushing to come in now, of course, with certain exceptions. These are dominoes that are falling. So the great stone wall of Trump and his non-cooperation is faltering on this, and he's already given away the primary evidence, the transcript of the phone call, admitting that essentially, saying that none of this is true, but as soon as he opens his mouth, expressing that yes, essentially, it's all true. The essence of the phone call he admits to, and then even suggests that China start an investigation against his political opponent.
He did nothing wrong. The phone call was perfect. His relationship with Rudy Giuliani and Giuliani's relationship with Igor and Lev and the money that they gave to Peter Sessions, now no longer congressman from Texas, to get rid of the ambassador to the Ukraine, Jovanovich, who stood in the way of what ultimately Putin wants. You have to understand that all of this Trump thinks he's pursuing his own agenda, but he's been susceptible to the suggestion of Putin.
Well,
and Putin's main plan is to get a hold of as much of the Ukraine as he wants. He's already got Crimea for sure, right?
And he has the eastern quarter of the country.
And he wants to codify her. He wants to make this a permanent thing.
Okay. So there's been a treaty that the president of Ukraine negotiated with Putin.
The new president.
The new president. And that is something that Trump apparently met with him about, that he wants him to accept. It's believed that Trump wants him to accept the Putin deal. So as soon as that happens, and the Ukraine loses effective control of those areas in some kind of peace arrangement that amounts to a surrender of some sort, then the sanctions would then, according to the way Putin looks at it, be lifted, and Trump would succeed in his mission of removing those sanctions. That's part of the agenda. Another part of the agenda, apparently for people like Rick Perry and this perhaps Sondland, and certainly perhaps this guy Pete Sessions, who's from Texas as well, involved, and certainly we do know that there's a interest on the part of Lev and Igor and Lev, the two people connected to Giuliani, who are U.S. nationals but were born Soviet citizens and are ethnic Ukrainians. These guys are part of the corrupt Ukrainian scene, and they have interest and want more interest in that Ukrainian natural gas company. So that's another thing that they wanted.
Hunter Biden was on the board of for $50,000 a month, even though he has no. So,
That's some kind of guarantee. Actually, even though that looks bad, that was probably as a Ukrainian attempt to have someone who would be some sort of high-profile guarantor that they would be not seen as corrupt by the Americans. The idea was under the Obama administration.
So he was a beard to make them look not corrupt.
They were
Hunter
trying
was like
to.
a patsy.
They were, okay, well, the U.S. policy under Obama was to, as much as possible, end corruption, and the appearance of corruption that was a problem for Ukraine in terms of their joining the European Union and NATO. And so they couldn't really, it was in U.S. interest that they become a cleaner, apparently cleaner government, so the U.S. would be able to support them better, and the Europeans would join in that support.
Sure.
Especially considering that they've been invaded by the Russians.
Right.
And once Putin came in, once Trump came in, the Putin puppet, Trump, his agenda became getting Jovanovich out of there because she was part of this earlier agenda of ending corruption. And if anything, Trump wanted to increase corruption and the image of corruption for his own political reasons, plus what Putin wanted. And Putin does not want an end to corruption and the appearance of corruption because it has benefited him by keeping the European Union at a distance.
Right, from Ukraine. They don't want to help the Ukraine when the Ukrainians are corrupt.
Well,
Government is corrupt.
Lev and Igor were transmitting, or they did transmit $300,000 to the Trump re-election political PAC. And out of that money, Sessions got most of it. And that was there was a understood or believed quid pro quo there that these people are testifying to that says that that was to enroll Republican Congressman Sessions in this whole push to remove the ambassador, not for any real reason other than that she was in the way of these several interlocking agendas.
Sessions wrote Pompeo saying that Ambassador Jovanovich had said something disparaging about Trump. So apparently that was worth $300,000, and it was also an accusation enough to get rid of a career
30-year career
diplomat who had been an ambassador to 2 countries and was considered an expert and was well thought of in the countries where she worked, well thought of in the State Department. You know, since the beginning, Trump has been demoralizing and gutting the State Department. The very thing of having Rudy Giuliani as his shadow Secretary of State. Giuliani wanted to be Secretary of State, but he never could have gotten past Senate. Trump wanted him as Secretary of State too, because he says, here's a guy who's even more corrupt than I am. That's why those two like each other, don't you think? They both think they're using each other, which is something not unusual amongst people who are corrupt.
Trump and Giuliani.
Trump and Giuliani are
and Trump and anyone
buddies.
he is associated with closely,
Yeah.
it would seem. Yeah, you know,
And they're
Mulvaney
both
is wrapped up
fascinated
in
with
this too.
mobsters and would like to be mobsters in their own right.
Yeah, it's said that this is one of the strange quirks of Giuliani is that at the height of his fame as mayor of New York City, or as, you know, a prosecutor with the Southern District of New York, he was bringing, you know, he encouraged his underlings, his coworkers, to come and, you know, drink coffee and watch The Godfather during the break times. You know, so he was like really fascinated with the whole, you know, he was entertained by stories of gangsters, and strangely so, you would think, even though he's a prosecutor, you know.
Isn't it interesting that he's become
Same with Cohen, the other lawyer.
Oh, he's become Fredo. Oh yeah, Cohen too.
Cohen was
Trump,
known for this kind of admiration of mafiosos too, and Trump himself.
Trump himself, yep, he's always talking about the rats.
Stool pigeons who were singing and all these old-fashioned supposed mafiosoisms. Yeah.
Trump seems to be, for a guy who admires the mafia so much, he seems to be afraid to pull the trigger against somebody's head, though. He can't even bring himself to fire people. He has to find someone to fire people for him.
Well,
remember when he asked Lewandowski to fire Mueller?
Yes. Okay, so this brings up a point about the whole obstruction of justice thing and how that ultimately, much to our horror as we watch this, was going nowhere, apparently, because there was this wall of non-cooperation. And then when people did testify, it was shown that, you know, this Lewandowski was a total liar. You know, his own statements to the media were total lies. And he said, but I'm telling the truth now under oath. But
I had no obligation to tell the truth then.
Then to the media that lies all the time. So
yeah, they lie, so I lie to them. That was his excuse.
And he was about the only one they were able to really drag in there, kicking and screaming, because he was not a government employee.
Remember, Lewandowski, Trump did not want to get rid of Lewandowski when he was his campaign manager, even when he beat that woman up, right on the camera and stuff, when he whammed her in the nose with his elbow, whatever, you know, knocked her down. Well, that's why he had to go as Trump's campaign manager, but they never really broke. Lewandowski and Trump remained close. He couldn't be on the campaign anymore because they had video of him whamming a woman right in the face with his elbow.
As far as Trump was concerned, one of his loyal henchmen, just like
yes,
Giuliani.
He remained a loyal henchman like Giuliani. Giuliani could not be confirmed as Secretary of State, so Trump makes him shadow Secretary of State. Lewandowski could not remain in Trump's circle because they have a video of him hitting some woman in the nose with his elbow, you know, because she asked a question he didn't like. So he had to go, but he remains in Trump's circle.
So
doing Trump's.
McGahn and other people never came forward to testify and were saying that, you know, because of executive privilege, we don't have to, and Barr was able to say, oh, executive privilege, they don't have to, and here's my BS legal opinion about that, based on, you know, BS understanding of the Constitution.
So we know Trump's been breaking the Emoluments Clause and other things for a long time. Finally, the deep state is willing to show its head and testify against him.
Okay.
His Republican...
The deep state.
The deep state.
He talks about the deep state as a conspiratorial, unelected shadow government that is out to get him, and that
The deep state is the infrastructure of the intelligence community,
so
established by the Democrats.
arguably the whistleblower, if that's the deep state, comes from the deep state
Yes,
and
a
sees
CIA
true,
agent, almost
sees
certainly.
true national security alarm bells ringing.
Sure. Now-
legitimately so.
Now they're going to turn against Trump. They wouldn't turn against him when he was doing all this other stuff, but now he's against their interests. You see, this is a...
Well, it's against national security interests. We're a
what
puppet of the Russians at this point.
You know, Trump was picked by Putin to bring down the American empire. And if you want to
and
see the
it's
American empire
underway.
go down, yes, he's bringing it down. Now the deep state is going, wait a minute, you're bringing down the empire. They didn't care when he was destroying environmental laws. They didn't care when he was spreading racist hate and all this other
He's
stuff.
threatening
But
international
now
American power projection.
Now the Republicans are like, oh, look at Syria. Oh no, Trump is really handing Syria over to the Russians.
Well,
he's handing Ukraine over to the Russians. We got to stop him. He's bringing the American empire to a close.
That's why
Some of us
Jovanovic-
want to see the American empire go down. Maybe not like this.
Jovanovic is testifying because it's not in U.S. interest in her opinion. So she's one of these deep state
Yeah, she
respondents in
Yes.
this case. The whistleblower definitely comes from
Deep
the
state.
national security apparatus. The appointee who was Inspector General for the Director of National Intelligence Coordinating Body is deep state, arguably also. I'd like to get back to why this is different than everything
That's
happened
exactly
before.
it.
Why
Because
is-
the deep state didn't care if he's gutting environmental laws. They didn't care if he's breaking the Emoluments Clause. But now he's messing with the American empire.
Well, and there are people, because there are people who are not as attached to Trump, especially considering the damage that he's doing to national security,
Yeah,
they're willing to
what
come
they
forward.
call national security.
As soon as any of them came forward, let's say as soon as Jovanovic indicated that she was coming forward and wanted to, and then she was prevented by Trump, and then as soon as she was subpoenaed, it was like, okay, whoopee, I'm coming in with all my evidence. The same thing was true of Volker. He wanted to get in there as soon as possible before other people spin his involvement other than himself. So he has been and is willing to come in as well, responding to subpoena despite the Trump and Barr attempts to prevent this. And this now seems to be the pattern, is that it's a rush of these dominoes to come in now. Some of them are appointee loyalists, others are what you would call deep state actors who have a vested national security interest that they're concerned with. So that's the difference. That's why people are coming in, because they don't want other people to tell the truth behind closed doors. There's no chance to coordinate among the Trump loyalists if the testimony is behind closed doors, unless they're hearing from the Republicans immediately, which may be the case anyway.
Well, Sondland is a political appointee, and
Yes.
he says he's eager to testify.
He was EU secretary who was talking to Volker, who was special envoy.
The three amigos, Perry, Sondland, and Volker.
And Perry
doing
is
Trump's
energy secretary?
dirty deeds. Perry is energy secretary.
Yeah, and then you see Perry and Sessions from Texas, and you
Two
see
Texans.
Igor and Lev, and they seem to have the
From Russia.
additional
So-
hinted at motivation of increasing their hands, collectively, their interests over this Ukrainian natural gas company as well.
Yeah, so let's talk about that. Is that Gazprom or Gazpro?
Gazprom is the big Russian natural gas conglomerate that had a an oligarch as its head, and he was the first big Putin sacrifice to Putin's power, and was sent to Siberia where he got kidney disease and got really sick and skinny and came back, and then he kissed the ring and was allowed to live, and he escaped to the United States as soon as possible. I haven't heard from him in recent years.
The U.S. is Russia's new Siberia, apparently, where they send their exiles.
Oh,
yeah, what was his
okay.
name? Verakovsky or something. Anyway, yeah, I know who you mean. So who's the Ukrainian gas company that Hunter Biden was making $50,000 a month sitting there, though he didn't know what was going on?
I don't know.
And is completely innocent, of course, except of anything except bad judgment.
I don't know what it is, but it's their big national company. No, Gazprom is the
Russian
company.
So then it's Gazpro.
Oh, well, that may be. It might be called Gazpro.
Yeah.
Is the Ukrainian company?
I think
okay.
So, yeah. Why don't you call us in? Let's put the number up there. Correct us if we're wrong. Things are changing so fast, and it's really hard to follow this story.
I don't think there's any way we're going to have.
We're not going to have any callers because nobody's watching, or because our phone doesn't work.
Well, people do watch. I mean, the proof is that you're watching right now. But we've had trouble with the phones, and we come in kind of late, so we really need to come in a lot earlier and make a big deal with staff here and ourselves to really find out why we can't get the phones to work.
Well, why don't we have the producer and the have Pablo look that up so we know what we're talking about. What company did Hunter Biden work for?
The actual
Can you get
name?
that, Pablo? Put that on the screen or let us know somehow.
If he, okay. Here's something that we haven't talked about yet, and that is what's going on with Bolton's. We have talked about it. We touched on it.
Well, we talked about it. We haven't talked about it on TV.
Bolton's interaction. Maybe we haven't talked about it on the air tonight.
So Bolton is a true deep state American empire cowboy.
Right, and he's
riding the range. He doesn't care about Trump. All he cares about is national security.
He quit or was forced out, a couple months ago?
A couple days ago.
No, Bolton? It's been a while. It has been a couple days.
Bolton's only been on for 6 months. It's only been a couple days since Bolton bolted.
Well, your couple days is like my 2 months. Maybe it's been 6 weeks. It's been weeks.
No, it hasn't.
Yes, it has.
Look it up, Pablo. When did John Bolton resign? It is recent. It is no longer than a week ago.
He resigned before all of this fecal matter was hitting the fan.
No, he did not.
Yes, he did. Before this recent Ukraine call thing came up, Bolton was already out of the way. Bolton, according to what I'm seeing, said the White House lawyers have to know about this. I can't believe you guys, Volker, Mulvaney, the chief of staff, had set up Volker and Sondland and not Kent, but he had set up Volker and Sondland and Perry to manipulate the Ukraine in order to gin up this fake evidence against Biden and Biden's son, and he said Giuliani is a hand grenade. And he said, according to 3 witnesses who are unnamed at this point, but that the Congress, the Democrats have gotten a hold of, when he made the hand grenade statement, he was also saying, I'm not going to be part of this drug deal you guys are cooking up, Which he didn't mean drug deal. He meant something as horrendously illegal as a drug deal, a conspiracy. So Bolton this is why Bolton was fired and or resigned. This was the issue, was that this thing was going on.
Hey, Pablo, can you look up when Bolton resigned as National Security Advisor?
See, I remember when Bolton left, we weren't talking about this most recent stuff. This most recent stuff is only like 3 weeks old now, perhaps a month old. And Bolton leaving was before that. People were speculating, oh, no more adults in the room, I guess. Oh, well,
Bolton was an adult?
no one can last that long in that office. They weren't talking about Bolton leaving in view of all this Ukraine stuff at the time. But now they are, because people have come forward, and we're starting to hear conversations that people have had and statements that Bolton has made as, he was erupting over all this stuff. He didn't want to go down with this thing. He didn't want to see this thing happen. Yeah, because I'm sure he wants the Ukraine to go into the European Union and become part of NATO, and for the U.S. to continue to base the areas of the former Soviet Union to prevent Putin from taking them back, because he's an old Cold Warrior. And Trump is a minion, really.
Oh, Putin.
Which is ironic that you end up with Bolton working for a minion of Trump.
I mean, a minion
of Putin, who is Trump.
Yeah, well,
that's what I meant.
Well, apparently Bolton thought that if he placated Trump, he could get his war on in Iran, which seems to be his biggest thing. He wants to annihilate the Iranians.
Well,
which proves he isn't a racist, because the Iranians are Aryan. He's not a racist. He just wants to kill anybody
who stands in the way
of Israel.
Yeah, well,
what is Bolton's thing, really?
Well,
Who is this John Bolton? I've never liked him.
Okay, I can tell you this about Bolton, the person that the Iranian government calls the mustache. Well, Bolton gets paid when he's not working for the intelligence community or the deep state or whatever.
He worked for Fox News for years.
He's done that, but he has gotten paid a great deal to make speeches that are fundraising for Iranian exiles. Iranian exiles are the people who have paid for Bolton to remain a Middle Eastern scholar, because they know that he's a hawk against Iran, and if the U.S. goes to war with Iran, these exiles have a chance to
get their
go
property
back home and become the elite again in Iran. So that's who he's connected with.
But
again, he's not a racist, and he's not necessarily against Iranians, but he likes to see an authoritarian Iranian regime rather than a religious, fundamentalist regime in power, I suppose.
So he's not getting any money from Israel, because Israel really wants the U.S. to obliterate Iran. That seems obvious. And Saudi Arabia is eager for the U.S.
I would be surprised to see
to
it's
attack
not getting
Iran.
money from Israel as well. But these days, Bolton has to be quite upset that the U.S. seems to be, under Trump, being driven from influence in the Middle East, as a whole. The Russians have become the go-to people for being the people to set up negotiations and the people to be the power broker.
So Trump said today
he's seeing the U.S. as a declining power there.
Exactly, and Trump said today he's okay with that.
Israel is saying that, they need to get better relations with the Russians because of the positive influence that the Russians have in current Middle Eastern situation.
Seems to be the case.
Which is all terrible news
for
to the
American
U.S.
Empire.
perspective from a national security perspective.
Unless your idea of national security doesn't have anything to do with the Middle East. I mean, why do we need the Fifth Fleet in the Persian Gulf, really? Why do we need to give Israel $4 billion a year in military aid? Why do we need to be in Syria? I mean,
well, these are interesting and important discussions for us to have, but certainly our most important discussion needs to be about removing Trump from office. Trump's instincts are to be a dictator. It's obvious that he admires dictatorship. He doesn't understand or want to understand the U.S. Constitution. He defies it routinely. And it's a scary thing because you have a growing number of the American people, primarily concentrated within self-identified Republicans, who say that their interest and support for democracy is waning. You know, that they're looking to perhaps other forms of government. So
like the Chinese.
That's interesting that you say that, because the youth in China, we're not talking about Hong Kong, but China in general, are now, rather than looking toward the US, they look to the Chinese model as something much more positive, considering, you know, perhaps considering what Trump looks like. I don't know. Between 15-year-olds and 29-year-olds, fully 32%, according to a poll that MSNBC was citing 2 nights ago, actually are no longer in support of democratic government. What did that say?
Burisma.
Burisma?
That's the name of the company that Hunter Biden worked for.
Well, that's a long way from Gazprom.
Worked for can you read that? Holdings?
Okay. Let's see that again. For Burlama. Okay, run it again.
Burisma.
Burlama. Okay, Burlama. I got that, but there's another word there. Burlama
Holdings.
Burlama Holdings. Okay. So the gas company in Ukraine.
Burisma.
No, Burlama.
No, that's not what it says.
Okay, let's see. Is it Burisma or Burlama?
Give us the date Bolton resigned.
Okay, you're right. It's Burisma. Burisma Holdings. Burisma Holdings. Okay, so that satisfies that.
What's the name of the gas company?
That's it.
Oh, is it? Sounds like a management company.
It doesn't sound like a natural gas company, but this is what Pablo tells us, is that according to his researches, the name of the natural gas company in the Ukraine that this is partially about is Burisma Holdings. Biden's
Hunter buys.
Worked for, I think he still does work for Burisma Holdings. Unless
does he?
Maybe he resigned.
They went
from
on
Burisma
ABC a couple
and went
days
over
ago
to
and said it was all a mistake. That it wasn't. He didn't do anything wrong, but he shouldn't have done it.
So on the 18th, the Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for Russian, Ukrainian, and Eurasian Affairs is coming in. This person's name is Laura Cooper. She will testify to the House Intelligence Committee. On Thursday, October 24th, Acting Assistant Secretary of International Security Affairs, Catherine Wheelbarger, is coming in to testify behind closed doors to the House Intelligence Committee. On Friday, October 25th, Acting Assistant Secretary for, on October 25th, Acting OMB, that's Office of Management and Budget Director, Russell Vought is coming in to testify to the House Intelligence Committee. So these are all the dominoes that are falling, and they're telling the truth. And Trump, something that's I have noticed is that you're not seeing the Republicans going out and making the circuit, except to Fox, but they're not as visible as they were.
Jim Jordan is, and Matt Gaetz are pretty visibly being idiotic.
Gates is involved in some of this stuff.
Gates called Adam Schiff the Captain Kangaroo of impeachment or something like that.
Yeah, that it was a kangaroo court, and that Schiff was the Captain Kangaroo.
The demented captain of the kangaroo court.
Yeah, very
stupid. And then they got Jim Jordan, the wrestler, who can't even notice when his athletes are being sexually harassed by his own staff, etc. But he can see right through the deep state. This is so complicated.
Gates was
of
thrown
all
out.
The crimes that Trump has committed since he's been president, this is the one. This is the one that they have chosen to impeach him on. This one that touches on the
treading on the deep state's interests.
Yes. This is it.
This is
So,
because
so
this
if we
is-
impeach him
so-
on this, do we go back to the status quo of a Cold War imperial activity?
Perhaps because the Russians have been on that footing now for several years, and the U.S. has not responded to it.
I mean, I've got about this much sympathy for Donald Trump. But you know, if getting rid of Donald Trump just brings us back to a status quo,
Well,
then
how status quo is it going to be if you have Elizabeth Warner or Bernie Sanders in there as president of the United States? I don't think that that's going to be status quo. I think that we're.
Yeah, do you think that's going to happen? I think they'd shoot Bernie first.
Oh,
Elizabeth, they might
forever
try
the
to.
pessimist, Steve.
You think
have to
they're going
think-
to let Bernie Sanders be president?
Considering what has happened, the U.S. needs to stabilize. And if the legitimate constitutional processes elect Warren or Sanders or Biden, then so be it. You know,
All right.
I think as far as these people are concerned at this point.
Okay, you're right. Bolton resigned almost 6 weeks ago.
Yeah, it was. I mean, it was before this, but it was over this. Apparently, Trump needed him out, and he needed to get out. Probably in equal measure over this stuff was coming up, and he had already been angry over it when he discovered it. So
And
he
he
was
was already-
holding his tongue on this for probably.
And he was
for quite a
already
while.
angry that Trump didn't declare war on Iran. So September 10, huh?
Yeah, it does seem that Iran is making attacks, even though a lot of people have an interest in there not being a war, like the Japanese. You know, their tanker gets hit and they go, "Oh, no tanker got hit." You know, it was. I'm quite certain that the oil refinery, the majority of ongoing refining capacity in Saudi Arabia blowing up was the act of the Iranians. Because the Iranians are desperate because Trump has forced them into an economic corner that's causing instability for the government. The government is shaky. The people are suffering.
Well, they are. The Europeans want to make a deal with the Iranians, or they've made a deal with the Iranians. You know, the Iranians were upholding their part of the deal. As far as I can tell, this is all about what Israel wants and what Saudi Arabia wants. And Trump is as
And
much
it
a
completely
as much
destabilizes the area.
much a puppet of Putin as he is of Saudi Arabia and Israel.
That could be. I think he's more a puppet of Putin firstly, and then of Israel secondarily, and his third great, amigo is Prince Bonesaw himself.
Oh, he loves Bonesaw. He would just really love to start a boy band with Bonesaw and Kim Jong-un and maybe a couple of these other dictators. Like,
Duterte.
You get Duterte to sing back up.
The Turkish guy, Erdogan.
Yeah.
Erdogan on drums.
Yeah. And Trump could be the bad boy.
The five bad boy dictators
the
of tomorrow. Today.
The Backstreet Bully Boys.
So, yeah. The dominoes falling, we have to look at it this way. I mean, you say you're disappointed that it's going to be over this deep state, national security, American empire.
When the emoluments
strikes
clause.
back.
What about all the rapes he's committed? What about that? Is that not
the
a
earlier show
impeachable fucking offense?
that we had that didn't make it to YouTube? We talked a lot about everything up to that point before this recent national security round that seems to be sinking the president. We were talking about all the other stuff, plus we were talking about his friendship with Weinstein. The president is accused of something
Epstein
like
too. Epstein. Don't forget the recently
not Weinstein, Epstein.
Suicided Epstein.
Yeah, that looks highly suspicious. Trump knew Epstein well, partied with him. Trump reportedly, according to someone who was a 13-year-old victim at the time, says that Trump raped her at this calendar girl party, according to what the girls thought, where you had girls as young as 12 years old up to, 15, and there were 28 of them there. They thought they were competing for, kind of a beauty pageant thing, and they'd be put on calendars as whatever, Miss October or something. And once they get there, there's the future president of the United States carrying out a rape.
And now suddenly, 52% of Americans now support Trump's impeachment and removal. Well, yeah.
Yes. Well, I think that the truth is, but this is a growing number,
It grows
and
every
especially
day.
growing among Republicans, is that the 52% of the overall population is in favor of the impeachment inquiry continuing. I think as that continues, that number will grow. It's already 28% of the Republicans themselves, which is, as the president would say, huge. That's huge. That's a huge earthquake in the political system now, that his support among his base is being significantly eroded now.
Well, it should
It can't
be.
come soon enough, considering, those poll numbers that show uncomfortably large numbers of Americans rejecting the idea of democracy under this influence of this president. You remember that woman who said, if there's going to be a dictator, I want it to be Trump. This was a woman at some kind of Bannon event, and she actually made that statement, and Bannon is like applauding her, like, oh, brave woman coming forward and saying it like it is.
I've heard that a lot. I said to a guy a couple of weeks
That was
ago,
from
I
the
said,
circus, actually.
I said, with Trump, ignoring subpoenas and everything, he's acting like a dictator.
Yeah.
And the guy got really angry. He said, no, he's not. And then he said, and that's exactly what America needs, is a dictator.
Yeah, that is,
So they got it both ways.
this is the most frightening thing about Trump.
It's not
is that
Trump, it's America that's
Trump,
frightening.
as the Senate in Rome said of Caesar, he would be king. This guy would be king if he could be king, and he's made the most outrageous statements about his political opponents, about, it's time to have treason trials and do executions. This is a monster in our midst. This is a person who needs to be ultimately sent out of office, then arrested, and then face trial and perhaps go to jail for the rest of his life. I think that if he had a
We've
mini
had a lot of
putt-putt
those
golf
who've got
course in his country club prison and he had no access to Twitter or the internet, then maybe that would be something to do for him.
Both
in his
George-
golden years, in a demeaning little miniature golf course.
Both George Bushes definitely should have been.
I agree with that. I mean, those are other topics, but talk about deep state doo-doo and crimes against the United States. Yes, we've talked about that a lot. And there's a lot of evidence for that.
We've reached a point where we've let so many presidents get away with so many
much.
war
And
crimes
they tend to be-
that if we let this one get away with this,
They tend to be Republicans. It's the Republicans who over and over again come after the United States Constitution. As much as they wave it around like some kind of flag, they ultimately don't care about it. And they care about it less now than they have for many decades, maybe throughout the entirety of the history of their party. I think, as we've discussed, it's because of demographic changes in the US. They see the kind of grave they've dug for their party by, staking out this racist territory. Ultimately, that's not going to win them majorities. They're not going to be able to be a governing party. So I really do predict and hope that my prediction is true, that the Republican Party will be fractured and essentially go extinct over this whole conflict that we're having at this point.
yeah, well, if the impeachment takes place on this national security issues, then we're just asking for a return to Cold War status quo. You say, well, what if Elizabeth Warren or Bernie get elected? Well, I guess. But, if the Democrats do again what they did 4 years ago, they're going to shove Biden down our throat. And Biden is a rickety front runner at best. He is not the man designed to...
Trump is damaged. I don't think that Trump can win election. I'm hoping...
I know, but if we get
Pence,
Biden, what's that? Oh, but Pence.
Pence is really wrapped up in the Ukraine thing, too. Pence was actually one of the leading coordinating people, but he's not cooperating. He's obeying the Trump, the Trump wall so far. He's not saying anything except that he's claiming that even though documents were put in his hands, even though his assistant listened to the telephone call itself, even though the telephone call was typed up, the summary plus, other summaries of the current situation, and he went to Ukraine. He says, "Oh, I never read those documents. I slept on the plane." That somehow, even though all these things were given to him, that he never looked at them, even though they were a few pages long. This is not believable. So I don't think that Pence will, if Trump goes down, I think Pence will be part of a package deal. I think the deal will be Pelosi, given the situation will become, for a short period of time, President of the United States. This is my prediction. The Republicans can't hold because this scandal is now too deep, too in the open, too many people are testifying, more are coming forward. It's a constant drip, drip, drip. That's more than a drip, drip, drip. It's a flood.
I can see the Senate turning on Trump, but
they despise him. This is what people say.
I would imagine they would keep Pence because they do not want Nancy Pelosi to be the first woman president, and I don't think she really wants to be either. Obviously,
okay. I think it is true that Nancy Pelosi doesn't want to be
but she
president.
would be if they got rid of them both. She's third in line.
I think she would be
second in line.
Not for her own sake, but for the sake of the country. I think that Pence, I don't want to see Pence actually be in a position to run because I think Pence is potentially as dictatorial and evil and destructive as the president in his own way, except that he is more competent
a little bit
and subtle than the president.
Here comes
so
the
he could be much
tale.
more dangerous than the president.
Yeah, he'll be the founder of the Handmaid's Tale kind of thing.
True enough. Yeah, it's scary.
Every sperm is sacred.
People were making jokes about The Handmaid's Tale and Trump, the Trump administration. Somehow, that it seemed to be leaning in that direction. Well, it's not so much a joke anymore.
No.
The extremity, the disdain for democracy is breathtaking.
Once again, Putin's plan.
Well,
make to the whole world. The Chinese love it too. It's like, look at America. Democracy does not work. Here is the proof.
Putin's Russia and, China, being the dominant players in the world would not necessarily be an improvement over the U.S. being the dominant stabilizing force that it's been.
The U.S. has squandered its moral authority.
But it has the capacity to remain a stabilizing force. And certainly the Europeans still want to use the U.S. as
a nuclear umbrella,
centralizing, as an umbrella, and the matrix that itself holds together this alliance that they depend on. I mean, before the U.S. was in charge of these things, they were at each other's throats for centuries, and they've been given a big
Europeans,
break.
Every 20 years would kill everybody in sight.
The same with the Japanese, but if the Russians and the Chinese become transcendent, that throws the international power politics, military balance and diplomatic balance into a tremendous, potentially, of course, unpredictable, chaotic, perhaps very damaging situation. I think it'll be natural for the U.S. to push back and to actually base, the easternmost edges of Europe up against the Soviet Union, because that's what Europe needs in order to prosper. It needs a ground level military and diplomatic protection from a Russia that wishes to expand again into Eastern Europe. Putin's stated goal is the recreation of the Soviet Union. I think more than that, he would like to, stretch the influence or essential control over half of what is now the European Union as well. I mean, not all of which were in the Soviet Union.
Even Israel is now saying, well,
The Russians aren't all bad.
America's a has-been in the Middle East. We got to start kissing up to
And
Putin.
the Russians are doing this with an economy that is smaller than Italy's.
Italy's the 5th largest economy in the world.
California is larger than Italy.
Yeah.
And Russia is, Russia has what, a $2 trillion economy? The U.S. has a $22 trillion economy. The Russians have ground troops, though, in Syria. Plus, they have Blackwater-type Russian mercenaries in Syria.
They've also got nuclear weapons and ICBMs.
And they have nuclear weapons. But we're not sure how many of them work at this point.
How many of them do they need to work?
Well, if 1 in 5 work, and they have a launch, that's going to be horrible, yes. But the only reason that Russia can spread its influence like this is because they have their own agent, inexplicable in itself, in the White House. Trump behaves as if he's a Russian mole. I mean, he has this Putin worship. Putin's obviously the superior partner in their relationship, and is it all about what? This woman who has that, sort of fashion model look, I forget her name, she worked for Trump until several months ago, then quit.
Oh, right. What was her name?
She was brought in to testify, and she didn't testify to things that took place after she was communications coordinator in the White House.
What was her name again?
Barbie doll. I don't know.
Barbie doll, yeah, something like that.
Well, a fascistic-looking Barbie doll, somehow, very severe kind of looking beauty. But anyway, she testified about the campaign because she wasn't an employee of the president at that time. She says that when word came through that there were these damaging tapes in Russia, that Trump said, "Oh no, I'm effed." And there was a big shock, and everyone thought the campaign was over. So this is a strange thing. I mean, it brings us back to the Steele dossier that the Republicans like to say was a big fake. I don't think the Steele dossier was a fake at all, because what is this Barbie doll woman then testifying to Nadler about? As far as this tape is concerned.
"Oh no, I am effed," when special counsel was announced.
He also did at the time that the tape was. Someone came in and said, "Oh, the Russians are talking about a tape," and Trump was like an "oh no," one of his "oh no" moments. He had another "oh no" moment. Then, that's not. Another one was, okay. So Barbie doll testified, I hadn't seen him react so strongly and everyone becomes so depressed about the prospects of the campaign, except the other time when, late in the campaign, it was the Access Hollywood thing. Now, as far as the tape was concerned, Cohen, she said, was put in charge of dealing with it. And Cohen apparently got confirmation that, the tapes are stopped at this end, back in Russia. So I think that was the Russians letting Trump know that they've got his blackmail material and confirming, keeping him on a leash, that he's got to do what he's supposed to do.
Well, we see in Syria and in Ukraine that Trump is definitely doing Putin's agenda.
I think
Trump
there
works
is
for Putin.
blackmail material. Plus, I think Trump hopes that by kissing the posterior of the Russian dictator, that he will still get his $1 billion Trump Tower of his dreams in Russia. Sure. Maybe he can live there because he's got to go somewhere else. He's got to escape sometime while he's still president, or he's going to end up in jail anyway. So that might be one of his exit strategies.
Unless he blows up the world, which might be an exit strategy.
Oh, we haven't even talked about the Chosen One or the King of Israel.
Well, yeah.
And I do suggest that for a laugh, people go on the internet and look for Cheeto Christ Stupid Czar, which
That
is
was funny.
to the
Randy
music.
Rainbow. Look up Randy Rainbow.
Randy Rainbow, to the music of Jesus Christ Superstar. And the lyrics going, the constant refrain coming around again and again is Cheeto Christ Stupid Czar, who the hell do you think you are? You know, and mentions the son of the King of Israel, the Chosen One, and you know, whatever, Son of God, you know, the statements that Trump was making when he was beginning to go nuts, really nuts a while back, which was really before this, that was even happening before this most recent thing. So Trump obviously is deteriorating quickly, and that has got to weigh on the conscience of Republican senators, I would think. You have someone who has that kind of destructive power and is willing to rile up the base even to the point of an imagined civil war. You have a danger to everyone, and they're going to have to see that. I don't think that Trump will survive the Senate. Most people I know continue to believe that the Republicans are in so deep with this guy that they're going to stick with him. I don't think so. I think senators, as we see with these dominoes, not all of which, you know, are distant from Trump, but even, you know, would have purported themselves to be Trump loyalists, are abandoning the sinking ship. The ship is going down. At some point, it becomes, you know, every seaman for himself.
See, well, Trump was in Louisiana last week, and he was introduced at his rally by Senator John Kennedy of Louisiana, Republican.
Oh, and then the video, right?
And well, in the video,
The mass shooting in
Kennedy says, I told you that Donald Trump loves Louisiana like Satan loves sin. The crowd just went nuts, and Trump thought it was hilarious, and he was practically laughing and doing his little Satan dance thing. He had more fun there than I thought.
And he does this thing with his hands.
He was capable of having, but I thought it was telling that these deeply red state Christians do really see Trump as a satanic character is, like the woman who said, if we have to have a dictator, I hope it's Trump. You don't want a mamsy-pamsy Jesus Christ kind of dictator who goes around and heals the sick and the poor. They want,
and pays for your college,
a race warrior on their side. They see that they are being swamped by the browns and the blacks, and they want a genocidal dictator to cleanse America of what they fear will be a onslaught of
a great white dark knight who will do the evil deeds that must be done.
That's what they want.
And
they haven't cared what he's done till now.
This is the result of the Southern strategy, all of the dog whistle politics that the Republican Party has been doing ever since Richard Nixon, or even Goldwater. These are all those evil chickens coming home to roost.
Evil chickens.
The evil chickens are coming.
Now there's a movie that needs to be made. Evil chickens.
The evil chickens coming home to roost. You know, in the Addams Family mansion now. You know, this is. It's logical that the Republicans would get to this point. They kept on going out on that limb further and further.
Giuliani too. Get a little more criminal every day.
Let's have you sum up, Stephen.
Well, are we still on?
We're still on. I think they can rest.
Well, all I'm saying is that Trump is a product of a society that lets the wealthy get away with crime after crime after crime after crime. He rose by crime to the top of the crime heap so that he thinks that he is the scum de la scum of all crime bosses, the tootie of all tooties, and he's tooting away, and he wants to completely blow up the American empire and the American Constitution for the benefit of Putin, because he thinks that he will personally benefit from that.
Yep.
To hell with everybody else.
Yeah, and as it should be.
And
He's
so
the most
all
real
these
person in the
crimes,
world.
We've been letting it
The
get
rest
away
of us
with
are not as
decade
real.
after decade because we let the rich get away with crimes. You know?
White-collar crimes.
And now finally he's going to be held accountable because of this thing that he's done. Of all the things he's done, now he steps on the toes of the CIA and on the deep state, and now he's got to pay.
This thing is simpler for most people to understand.
I understand the emoluments clause better than I understand this.
For most Americans, the fact that he made the call and he was trying to get them to make essentially a drummed-up investigation on Biden was clearly a violation of his oath of office.
Yeah, it looks like
And the rest of this, trails in behind that. So they have to keep the focus narrow. If they bring in everything, they'll lose the focus, and they can go to trial in the Senate, and the Republican senators will see an opening where they can start picking at the peripheral stuff and confuse it. They're going to have a much harder time to pick apart what Trump actually said in the same way. So I think that they have to stick to it. And goodbye. This has been Osei Can You See? Are we?
I think we're done.
Are we still running, or is there any way that we can? Okay, well, we're still on. Further final statements, Steve?
Well, I'm just afraid that if this is the premise on which the impeachment is going to happen, it's not going to be very instructive in terms of what we've been concerned with for the last 23 years on this TV show, which is the class war. This is a class war, but Trump is going to be impeached based on national security, but what about the class war? We've been distracted towards the race war, distracted towards the Cold War. What about the class war?
I think the class war issues have been subsumed, taken over to a degree by Trump. The tariffs were Trump's attempt to get a handle on a class war issue, which is a legitimate
without really
issue.
doing anything.
Well, this is why he did the tariffs. He did the tariffs because he thought that would be one of the primary ways that he would say, see, I'm doing something about the elites, the economic elites abandoning you and making the greatest transfer of wealth in history from the American lower and middle classes to China itself has been the greatest transfer of wealth in the history of the world. It's happened very rapidly, and that's a legitimate issue. I think it'll be a mistake if the Democrats don't deal with the reshoring of the economy to the U.S. This whole idea that if you're an American, you can invest anywhere in the world has been of great detriment. The stock market does not invest in the United States. For 30, 40 years, under Republican leadership to end tariffs, it has, the U.S. Investing class has divested from the U.S. and invested in cheap labor markets, and that has been an extremely damaging element of this class war that you're talking about. And the Democrats have to address that, because right now they've left the field completely to Trump. And the Republicans.
Yes, they have, and they still are, because they're impeaching him not on those grounds, but on the grounds of what the CIA and the globalists want. So people who adhere to Trump and see him as some sort of working class hero will be saying, the elites got together and got rid of Trump because he was trying to fight for us. This is a disaster. This premise for impeachment. You say it's simple and it's direct,
they have
but
more
it's
of a chance.
Wrong premise.
I don't think it's a disaster, because I think I was in favor of seeing him being impeached on the obstruction of justice from
Absolutely.
the original charges. But
Absolutely.
I don't think that was going to happen because the Republicans, the administration, had muddied the water. They had uncooperated enough that it just wasn't going to happen. And at least this guy has to be removed because he is a dictatorial threat to the United States. He has to be removed, and then we can talk about the future of the United States with him out of the way. But right now, he's in incredible danger, and I think he's on the run. Okay, are we? Okay, you've been with OSEC and UC. In case you're still listening. This show is live the first, third, fifth Wednesday of every month. This is GRTV. This is Grand Rapids, Michigan, and we are OSEC and UC. And we're off? Okay.
now.
All right. Okay. Thank you, Steve.
Thanks, Pablo, for getting those facts up there.
Yeah.
That was good. We should do more of
Burisma
that.
Holdings? You know, maybe he worked for that before. I'm not sure. But yeah.